gentlemen. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. What kind of special concerns should boys and men of color be mindful of, including racial factors contributing to mental health, negative issues with healthcare systems, and inherited factors in our families and throughout our generations and in our environments? How do we approach that as young men and boys of color? I'll start with Richard. What do you think about that, boss?
I mean, I think that we should always be able to, associate ourselves with like other people who are going through the same situation. Either like circles to be able to talk to other people. Just because when we feel that there are other people who are like us, going through anxiety, depression, all that stuff, then it makes us feel much better that, again, we're not alone, we're not hopeless. And pretty much it's just a matter of seeking all the resources that were provided on earlier right here on these websites.
Yeah, definitely. And I know Diego talked a lot about having peer support during his time of anxiety. Diego, tell us a little bit more about the peer support and how we can help boys and young men find peer support around them.
Yeah, well, I think it's important, like you said, being a man of color, being in a minority group, to find other people that are able to communicate with you well. Like I think, within, being a colored, a lot of times your battles with mental health are kind of ignored or they're not taken seriously. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality of the community, right? So I think it's important to at least have one or two people that you can confide in, whether it's a man or not, but just someone that understands, maybe why you choose to keep certain parts about your life private because of that stigma that Julio was talking about. That's especially prevalent in, colored communities.
Right. So would you say it's beneficial to be quiet about the stigma surrounding you and or your family and mental health? Or is it best to speak up if you're struggling?
It's always best. Oh,
go ahead.
Okay, I said it's always best to speak up, but I understand why some people feel that pressure, from their family and culturally to just be quiet, rather than to speak up.
Mm-hmm. And being a man plays a role in that too, because in our male culture or in a toxic masculinity culture, we're not taught to speak up about our feelings. We're not taught to share our emotions or to even have discussions like this, so it's best to speak up. And I know, Richard, you wanted to add to that. Go ahead, boss.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, it is. I wanted to reinforce that, yes, it is best to speak up. And yes, in minority, community, we are taught, be a man and keep quiet. But honestly, for everybody watching and those people who have experienced anxiety or are experiencing anxiety, it's very hard to share your emotions. It's very difficult to tell people how you're feeling because of again, the stigma, or that you might be ridiculed and might be told, you're a man, toughen up. Like, what are you complaining about?
Right.
But it's to open up, then bottle it up. Because once you keep everything in a bottle, it's going to open up with all the pressure that you've been storing, and it's not going to open up nice. And you could either hurt yourself or someone else, and that's why it's important to talk to the right people. That's why it's also good to have, again, the circle of people who you can trust, people who are who will keep a secret, or be able to help you by reaching out to those services that you may not have the courage at that moment to reach out to yourself.
Mm, yeah, definitely. Um, what else? What else should we be doing to break down the stigma of mental health so that we don't find ourselves in a crisis or an emergency as men? What's our perspective? Julio, what are your thoughts?
I think that, first of all, recognizing that everything that we have learned culturally, historically, from our family, from our parents, not everything applies today, and not everything is truth, right?
Hmm.
Um, I see one of the problems that we have as people of color is that for a very long time we have like put um, the resilience to trauma and pain as something to aspire to do, right? And the reality is that we shouldn't look at, well, my toughness for trauma, it's something that I look forward to do. Actually, it is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay to be in contact with our emotions. And when I think from an indigenous perspective, right, uh,
Hmm.
I'm like I talk about decolonizing my myself and my community.
Hmm.
In indigenous communities, there is this concept of a sacred circle where one of the members sometimes is put in the center when they're going through a very hard time, and everybody else around the circle helps them out. And
Mm.
men are taught that tears are something that is very healthy because just like water in a river or a creek, it needs to flow. Because if it remains stagnant, it just goes sour, right?
Hmm.
So the same thing with us. And to look at our brains as something that is part of our body. You know, I think that is so funny how we pretend that we live in silos, my spirit, my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health, right? If somebody cuts one of my legs, I can continue life. But if somebody like does something to my brain, if I get a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, it's going to affect every single thing in my functions to
Mm.
live a normal life. So why don't we look at mental health concerns the same way? It's something that is affecting my brain that is impairing every other function in my body. And to give that compassion to one another and to say, I understand that my ancestors, whether it's I'm an Afro-Mexican indigenous man, right? Like my ancestors had to go through a lot of things, but it's time to heal. I don't have to be in that survival mode anymore, and I'm worthy to heal and to have a better life. That's the first step to destigmatize and fight for mental health.
Yep. Thank you so much, Julio, for that. Um, anything to add, Malika? I think you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, I was gonna say that exactly what Julio was saying is completely correct. I believe that a lot of our family members. It's good for us to understand that our ancestors and our family members had to go through a lot of traumatic experiences in order for
Mm.
us to be where we are. But it's also good for our older family members to understand that this is a new time and place, and just because the things that we're experiencing today are different or seem less stressful to them than it was for them when they were our age, doesn't invalidate, right? A lot of times coming from it's, and I'll specifically speak from a black household, when you tell someone in your family you're depressed, you get a response of, well, you don't know what depression is, or you don't have a reason to be depressed, or you haven't went through these things yet. And and it's and I think that happens because our family members, they were depressed, but they weren't allowed to call it that. They didn't have the privilege to say that, oh, I'm depressed and now I need to go see a therapist.
Mm.
And I also really wanted to add this other part on. I love that Julio brought up the fact that people don't look at mental health as important. as they do physical health. And
Mm,
like I always have this saying of, if we're gonna go, to the dentist twice a year, you're gonna go to the doctor twice a year for all these checkups, then I think you should add in this element of a mental health checkup, just as, and bring it to the same level, if not more important than your, these physical and dental health check-ins.
yep, yep, definitely. And asking for help, back to what we said before, learning how to ask for help when you're dealing with stressful situations and environments. Asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. This is incredibly important. Uh, my grandfather was 87. He just passed away last Wednesday, right? Lived a beautiful long life. We were best friends. I'm at peace with with him no longer being here, but the huge role that plays in a Latino family, since my grandfather was that way, is back in the 1930s, he was separated from his siblings and his family because his mother was a single mother of four, and she was dealing with depression. But in that day, they didn't go and seek out any help for depression. They put her in a mental institution, and then he went to an orphanage at 5 years old. And then he was shown no love and affection throughout his entire life, and he suppressed all of his mental issues with alcohol and women. So those things just went passed on down the line, and it comes back down to me and where I am. Like we all said, this is a different time that we live in, and we have to learn to ask for help so that we don't struggle in our life or for the rest of our life with these mental health issues.